We are God's creative creatures. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. The Bureau of Labor Statistics published a report last year projecting huge losses in 3 occupational groups: administrative assistants, production, and sales. Change is good. The old adage, you'll get change from everything but a vending machine, applies to the workplace. Jobs are changing. They always have. They always will. That's good. We call that a dynamic economy. You would rather live in a dynamic, not a stagnant economy. Wealth migration. My podcast number 131 is titled Abraham and Wealth Migration. It points out that when Abraham moved from Ur of the Chaldeans to the Promised Land, he was moving to better land. People have continued to move to better land, and that's why we've seen them move from California and New York to Texas and Florida over the last few years. People vote with their feet in a dynamic economy. They will also change jobs that take them to better land in an occupational sense. When I did my PhD dissertation on U.S.-Russian joint ventures, I heard the phrase from workers in Russia, "They pretend to pay us and we pretend to work." Now, that's an indication of a centralized, stagnant economy. Even today, dynamic Americans make about $70,000 each, while the stagnant Russians make about $33,000. Wouldn't you rather live in a dynamic economy like the United States? If so, you have to grow accustomed to job changes. People who prepare for and anticipate change do better than those who don't. Before my mother died in 2001, she looked forward at changes in employment and asked, "What will my grandkids do for work?" Well, the economics answer is pretty easy. Create value for your neighbors. If you believe people are made in God's image, by the way, that's the title of my podcast number 32, you believe that their creativity came from their Creator. Get it? We are God's creative creatures. In the little book, Economics in the Christian Worldview, I wrote the following: as long as the fallen nature produces unlimited wants and the creative nature has unlimited creativity, there will be unlimited employment. Free trade. While the Trump economy was much more dynamic than the Biden economy, their international trade policies are strikingly similar. They both want to bring back manufacturing to the United States. I tell my college graduates, if you're offered a $75,000 job selling investments and a $50,000 job making cars, take the 75. See, they don't need my advice on that one because they do what just about every self-interested economic maximizer does in a dynamic economy. They take the 75. Now, critics of free trade make the assertion, "Oh, we can't all be stock traders and hamburger flippers," to which I respond, why not? We should do what society rewards. Look, if the South Koreans create more value making cars, they should make the cars. If the Vietnamese create more value sewing shirts, that's what they should do. David Ricardo called this comparative advantage. Of course, that means that we might not make cars anymore, nor shirts. But there are lots of things we used to make that we don't make anymore because we've moved up the economic value-added ladder to items that create more value. When it became cheaper to make steel in Turkey, folks in Pittsburgh moved to other jobs that create value for their neighbors. When furniture became cheaper from Poland, workers in North Carolina moved on to other products and services. And that's why we've moved from a product to largely a service economy. Locals have an advantage in providing services because it's pretty hard to cut hair in Kansas from Malaysia. Okay. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. That's Corinthians 13:11, and it applies to more than the earth versus heaven realms. That scripture verse is about perfection, which we will not gain in this life. We are east of Eden and west of heaven, where our charge is to use the resources God gave us to supply products and services to our neighbor. As adult economic thinkers, We need to find more advanced, creative, innovative ways to do that. The old ways won't work. See, a little side note here. That scripture reminds me of an enlightening phrase from the new book, Manhood by Josh Hawley. He says that a boy becomes a man when he produces more than he consumes. Of course, there are other ways in which a boy becomes a man, but that's a pretty good economics explanation. Industrial policy does not work. The Wall Street Journal carried an article titled, "The Lordstowns of Industrial Policy." The article explained why the electric vehicle maker in Ohio went bankrupt. Quote, "Lordstown is another example of the peril of politicians allocating capital. Far too often, and despite taxpayer subsidies, the government picks losers." End quote from the Wall Street Journal. Former British citizen Samuel Gregg made a really nice presentation that touched on this topic at the recent Acton Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I mentioned to some assembled friends afterward that I'd like to get the address of Mr. Gregg's parents in the UK so I could send them a note of thanks for reducing the cost of my airplane flight that I would take the next day. You see, Airbus forcibly took tax dollars from the citizens of the UK, France, Germany, and Spain to build the aircraft company. Their tax dollars subsidized my airplane trip the next day, even if I rode on a Boeing plane. That's because Airbus forced down the cost of Boeing's planes competitively. You see, the typical response to industrial policy from another country is to try to compete with that country's industrial policy. Milton Friedman had the opposite response, and he was correct. So, if China taxes their citizens to build lawnmowers, we should just raise the metaphorical bullfighter's cape and say, "Ole, come on in. We'll take all the subsidized mowers you're willing to ship us. And by the way, what else would you like to tax your citizens to subsidize so that our U.S. consumers can buy it cheaper?" See, as you think about it, a smart industrial policy should tell us what industries to get out of, not which ones to enter. Look, this is pretty simple strategy stuff, and it comes from Sun Tzu. His book is called The Art of War. The basic idea is to win without fighting. You use the opponent's strength against him. I suppose it's taught in karate also, but I don't know much about karate. I do understand American football. If the defense is blitzing up the middle, let them through the line and throw a little screen pass out into the flat. Go where they're not. Economic strategy is that simple. Dumping is a subject for another podcast, so I'll ask only one question. Why does our government prevent suppliers from selling products in our country at too low a price? A Christian economist who is concerned about the poor would allow the importation of cheaper products. She wouldn't stand at the border and say, "Those products are too cheap." Gee, I've never said that as I was buying something. Have you? But your tax dollars are being spent to prevent dumping of products in the U.S. that are too cheap. They're trying to protect domestic industries. It's a fool's game. It never works. People are creative. Folks think that when self-driving trucks replace truck drivers, we'll find those truck drivers sitting on the side of the road, wringing their hands and crying. Okay, my dad drove a truck. To make that assumption of him is insulting, and it's insulting to current truck drivers. I assume the opposite. Truck drivers are creative people, made in the image of God, who are energetic and innovative enough to find some other way to provide value for their neighbors in a dynamic economy. The important part of creative destruction is found in the first word, creative. It's good, and it expects folks whose jobs are destroyed to be creative in finding another job. Yeah. The little book, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, sold 28 million copies. It made a good point and encouraged people to accept job changes in a dynamic economy. But it was based on demand economics, and I'm a supply sider, so I wrote a little response titled, Who Made My Cheese? It encouraged readers to think more about supplying demand. It's pretty simple economics. If you just keep supplying demand, changes in employment will be fine. As the Christian economist I say, If you love your neighbor, you will supply her with products and services she demands. If you love yourself, you'll make a profit while doing so. In economics, we call that first part consumer surplus and the second part producer surplus. Food comes first. In 1800, 90% of Americans worked on farms. By 1900, it was 60%. It's now 2.5%. Every person who leaves a farm moves to the production of something else, and that enriches the economy. If 2.5% of our people are making food, that frees 97.5% of them to provide other products and services like that computer you're staring at right now, the desk it's on, the shoes on your feet, and the shirt on your back. I know what you're saying. We don't make any of those four things in America anymore. You're right, and that's good. In our dynamic economy, we have moved up the economic ladder from making simple goods that provide little economic value to higher level goods that create greater value. As we continue to move up, we all get richer. The United States of America is the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. It gained that position by rewarding a dynamic economy that welcomes job change among God's creative creatures. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.